It's your connection coach, and this is the rant of the week. Totally unrehearsed. Today, I want to talk about virtual conversation, but a lot of this will apply to also conversation. How do you use verbal communication to create community and create intimacy in your group? So we're going to talk about how it's done normally, normative connection, and how you, as an innovative community builder, how can you create intimate conversations that build trust and community? Okay, so first off, our whole culture, Western culture, it really focuses on intellectual connection, okay? And conversation mostly is intellectual. It's mostly factual. When people are having conversations, oftentimes they're just talking about facts, and there's very little emotion or vulnerability being expressed. Okay, so the most superficial level of conversation is factual. And speaking of ideas as well is also still factual. It's not as personal as a storytelling conversation where there's much more potential for emotion. Okay, so far, what is normative connection? Most people are connecting in an unstructured, organic way, meaning there's a lot of interruptions, there's a lot of distractions, and they're mainly talking about facts or ideas. They're not actually talking about themselves or their feelings or their thoughts in the moment, something a lot more personal and vulnerable. Okay, so how do we change that? Okay, I said that normative conversation, it's hyper factual and it's hyper unstructured, meaning people are just distracted and tangents are happening all the time, and so no one really feels heard because every 10 seconds there's a tangent. Well, how do we change that, and how do we use conversation and verbal communication to really build communication, build community in a group, whether it's your remote team or whether it's at your dinner party? Well, the first thing we got to do is we got to create structure. We got to create a level of intentionality in the conversation. And so that's why I'm a big fan of conversational exercises where I give my group a question or a prompt and people really listen intently. It's an exercise, meaning people are paired up and they ask each other the question and they listen intently, versus an organic conversation. It's often all over the place because people's minds are all over the place as a result of dopaminergic smartphones. Another video, we'll talk more about that. So the first step is giving the conversation just a little structure, giving your guests a question to ask each other or giving them a prompt or a theme, and really creating this context where we're going to step outside the normative connection for a second and we're going to connect intentionally. We're going to connect attentively, okay? Like intentionality and attentiveness, those are pretty much the two crucial factors in meaningful, emotionally bonding conversations. So if you can, as a speaker, as a facilitator, set that context, say, hey, usually we connect this way, but right now we're going to do this. We're going to connect intentionally, we're going to build community, and we're going to answer this prompt together in pairs or in a group of four, something like that. So the first step, apply structure. The second step, like I said earlier, most conversations are hyper heady and intellectual. So the second step is we need to choose a prompt. We need to choose an exercise that actually gets people feeling something. And that's why I love storytelling. One of my favorite exercises, and ironically it involves a smartphone, it's called show and tell. And you essentially show someone a video or photo from your life, and then you tell the story of that video or photo. And usually it's a video or photo that brings back so much joy, and you get to share that with someone. So the same applies to storytelling, okay? If we get people sharing stories, meaningful stories, emotional stories with one another, there's much more emotional depth to that conversation, okay? Questions like, what was an experience you had that got you out of your comfort zone? Something like that, it has more emotional intensity than a conversation based solely on ideas like, oh, what do you think of the future? Are you optimistic or pessimistic? That's kind of a little bit more heady. Okay, so totally improvise those questions as well. So we want to get into storytelling mode. And when people get into storytelling mode and they share something emotional, that's when bonding can happen. So we talked about 2 actions to take. If you want to create connection through conversation, you got to apply a little structure, and then you got to increase the emotional content of that conversation. If you want to join me in my laboratory, I post only 20% of my content on YouTube. Join my laboratory for all the tips and hacks on building community and creating connection experiences. See you there.